Hey everyone, how's it going? And welcome to this Microsoft Copilot Cowork Masterclass. Copilot Cowork just hit general availability, and I wanted to put together this comprehensive guide, this program for anyone who is interested or looking to roll this out to their business or organization. My name is Howden Rashid, I'm a Microsoft MVP, MCT, and I really think this technology can change the game for the way that we get work done on a day-to-day basis. I've been getting hands-on with it, and I spent hours and days putting this guide together for you so you can kind of drive on the experience that I gained in those days of hardship and some successes as well. Now, a bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you are watching this on video, you can actually watch this entire course for free on Power Academy with no ads. It's the exact same content, but it's going to constantly be updated. You can mark your lessons as complete, and you could come back to it so you can pick up from where you left off. If you're interested, I've left the link at the top of the description, and if not, then feel free to enjoy this experience on YouTube. So without further ado, hopefully I've talked up the technology enough to get you interested. Let's get started with the masterclass. So of course, we're just getting started. So this is your welcome and getting started module. So this masterclass covers 6 modules, right? We're on the welcome and getting started module right now, which is module 0, but we're also going to cover what Copilot Cowork is, so give you an introduction to the technology, how it works, and some of the key findings that I've found through my experimentation. We're going to go through Cowork licensing, and this is going to be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt because people aren't particularly happy about this at the time of recording this masterclass. There's something right now in Cowork called usage-based billing, and if you don't know what that means, don't worry. It basically means you pay for what you use, and it can get quite expensive. So I do see the landscape of licensing changing, but if you are watching this video, let's say within a few months of it releasing, then the licensing might be the same. But I'm going to point you to resources and guides so you can keep up with the licensing to see exactly where it sits. Then we're going to be getting hands-on, right, with your first tasks with Copilot Cowork, actually trying to delegate some of the work that you have on your day-to-day basis to this new technology. We're going to go through plugins and connectors and actually extending Cowork to work within our business processes. And then we have 2 modules that will be dropping on Power Academy very soon. We have security and governance, so actually governing Cowork within your organization, and adoption and next steps for Copilot Cowork and how you can enforce this within your business. So something I get asked a lot is, who is this masterclass or program actually for? So when I actually had to think about this, there were 3 main entities, individuals, what have you, that I think this masterclass would benefit the most. And the first one is the individual. So you're probably working within the Microsoft ecosystem, the Microsoft cloud. Your business probably has access to Excel, Word, maybe even Copilot now, and you want to understand how you can do some of your work faster. If this is the case, then the masterclass will be really good for you. The next entity I kind of thought about is the team lead, right? The person who's actually in charge for rolling out this type of technology. If this is you, then I think the whole masterclass would be valuable, but particularly the licensing, the security and governance, and adoption, which will be dropping very soon. And then finally, the curious professional, right? If you're just interested in how this technology works and if it can be valuable for you, the idea is by the end of this masterclass, you will have enough information, enough data to make an informed decision on that. You can make a call if you actually want to invest in this technology, try and learn it a little bit further, and of course, start delegating your real work to that as well. I also have in the bottom right that there is no prior Copilot or Cowork experience needed. Of course, it can be beneficial to have some of this experience, but within this masterclass, I'm going to assume no one knows anything. So we're going to be starting completely from scratch here. Now I want to go through what you'll be able to do by the end of this masterclass, because you've probably seen the time. It's probably a little bit longer than you would just watch a normal YouTube video, if it's 10 minutes, if it's 15 minutes. So I want to kind of explain to you why I believe this would be valuable for you and some of the capabilities that will be instilled within you after finishing this masterclass. So by the end of the course, you'll have 7 new capabilities, and they are all listed on this screen. You'll understand Cowork, how it works, and also the licensing. You will get Cowork set up on your machine, and you'll understand all of the prerequisites to do that. You'll be able to delegate to Cowork and not just be able to do it randomly, but actually do it well, right? If you really think about it, these masterclasses, these courses, I'm not going to go and tell you to just type in a line or 2 lines or a sentence to Cowork and kind of just go off and do that. That's very easy to do. These chat interfaces, these AI tools are by design supposed to be easy to utilize and use. That is the whole value proposition of AI and why more and more businesses are adopting it. So we're actually going to learn the principles to actually delegate well. And we're going to draw upon principles to delegating to humans to actually be able to delegate to Cowork too. Then number 4, we're going to run light, medium, and heavy tasks and understand the differences between the 3 task types that you can actually run Cowork in. Then we are going to learn to extend Cowork with plugins and skills, and also connectors. You understand how you can keep Cowork secure for use and governed within your ecosystem, and you'll walk away with a full understanding of Cowork so you can make a practical use of it within your role. So by the end of the masterclass, the idea is that all 7 of these capabilities will be instilled within you so you can use Cowork in the best way possible. So the first thing I kind of want to instill within you during this program, within this masterclass, is moving from assistance with AI to actually delegating work to AI. Now, in my opinion, this is the mental framing that you're going to need, not just for utilizing Cowork and these types of AI technologies, but all AI technology in the future. So I really think this lesson is one of the most important within this masterclass because it frames your mind to actually making the most use of this technology. So here's the mindset shift that we want here, right? We're moving from asking AI to help to delegating real work to it. And with that, when we're delegating things, it's much more different than being there and steering the AI within conversation, right? When we're delegating something, we're giving it our trust. We're giving it the ability to go and complete something end to end. And as you're going to see with the Cowork licensing area, as of this point of recording, it is not cheap, right? You need to make an informed decision if this is something that you are going to utilize for a particular task, and if you are going to get the return on investment for that task. Even though Cowork isn't cheap right now, it still can be cheaper than you doing something yourself. So we need to understand the principles to be able to delegate work to Cowork efficiently. As I've been speaking about, to utilize Cowork effectively, we must first learn how to delegate. And here on the left-hand side is probably how most people use AI, right? You speak to the AI, you get a response, you speak back to it, you get a response, you speak back to it, right? You remain the executor of every step, and you are able to steer the direction of that AI when you're having that conversation with it. What this course really builds is, rather than having a continuous loop between you and AI, you have a very strong brief that you give Cowork in this case. Cowork then executes on that brief, and you can see you're not involved in this area over here. And then the result is returned to you based off of that brief. You move from someone who is actually doing something, so you're just having a conversation here on the left-hand side, to directing some work being done. Now, don't get me wrong, there are certainly going to be moments where you need to kind of chime in and steer the direction of Cowork working. And you have the capability to do that with, dialing into Cowork on your mobile device. Since it's all in the cloud, you can move between devices as well. But the main idea is we're looking for a return on investment in Cowork. And if you're involved on every step of the way, then you are not going to get that return on investment, and you're better off just doing it yourself. So this is really what this course wants to build upon. Now, funnily enough, delegation to AI works in the same way as you delegate to a human, at least in principle, right? So these are kind of the 4 principles of delegation that I want you to remember, that I want you to use within context when you're speaking to these types of co-working devices and AI tools. So the first one is delegating the outcome rather than the steps, right? Cowork is a tool that does the work for you. So the idea behind Cowork is it will decide the steps that it needs to go and conduct based on the capability and ability that it has. If you try and determine every single step of the journey, you are really going to struggle because Cowork might try and resolve something that it can't actually do. Obviously, there's going to be some steering involved here, right? Always with AI, we need to steer it in the right direction, and that might come in the form of steps. So I'm not banning steps from your Cowork briefs. But this is me just saying that utilizing this technology means delegating the outcome and being very specific on what that outcome looks like rather than delegating every single step. You don't want to confuse Cowork. You want to give it a very clear goal and allow it to basically go off and find what it needs to find to adhere to that goal. Then we've got the second point over here, which is handing over the whole job. And this is really opening the conversation on return on investment. Now, if you're involved in every single step of Cowork's process, really how much ROI are you getting? Aren't you just better off doing that work yourself? And this is really what this second point answers. You don't want to be involved in every single step of the loop. You still be the one doing it. So you really want to hand off the whole job and give that belief and trust within the brief that you've written to Cowork, so you can go off and spend your time doing more productive things and other things that Cowork might not be able to handle for you. Third is the importance of the brief. Now, think about if you're delegating work to another human being, right? You need to tell them where to find resources, what resources to particularly use, perhaps, or even just a general direction to look in. And this is really where the brief comes in handy. A brief to Cowork is everything. It basically gives the context, the materials, anything Cowork needs to steer it into the right direction before it goes off and actually does the work for you. Now, a brief might take a few iterations between you and Cowork before it can actually go and do everything for you. I always recommend with these AI tools and this technology to always prompt at the end for it to ask you for any gaps that it needs to fill. And you'll see we'll be doing that with Cowork quite a lot during this process. So we're going to be putting a lot of emphasis on the briefing, because if you write the brief well, then Cowork results will be much better. And then the final point is be reachable, but don't hover, right? And if Cowork needs any clarity on different areas, etc., you can dial in with different devices like your phone or, of course, your laptop if you still have it on in the background, just to clarify those decisions, right? And again, you might see a bit of a tension between point 2 and point 4 because, point 2 is handing off the whole job and point 4 is being reachable but not hovering. But this just means that if Cowork does get into a rut or if it gets stuck, have the processes in place where you can basically continue the course. Again, we're all talking about ROI here, right? So we want to make sure that we're not doing too much of this, but just enough so Cowork can give us a better output. AI is only as good as the input you give it, right? And I'm sure some CTO somewhere has said this. And this goes for all AI technology. If you give a shoddy prompt, if you give something that the AI is going to go off and, not do well with, then you're going to run into a lot of difficulty, which is why we put a lot of attention during this masterclass into the brief that you give Cowork. Now, I think a brief has 6 main areas, which is really important. We have the outcome, we have the sources, we have the operations that it's going to handle, the format that we want things back in, the judgment calls that it should make, and also the constraints that it should avoid. And the 6th one is really, really important. Now, we're not going to get into all of these points in particular here because we have a separate section, a separate lesson dedicated to briefing and writing good briefs. But I just wanted to kind of set the seed for you on the different principles of writing a good brief and what it should entail and what it should include. Okay, so in this section, I'm going to get you set up to actually use Cowork within your organization and within your machine. So the first thing you need to have is you need to be an administrator for your particular tenant, right? And that's how we're doing and fueling all of this. So if you're not an admin, then you need to get your admin to turn this on in the way I'm about to show you. If you are an admin, the first thing you want to do is navigate to the M365 Admin Center by just going to admin.microsoft.com or admin.cloud.microsoft. So the first thing we need is an M365 Copilot license. And the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to go into users, I'm going to go to active users, and I'm going to click on my account. And once I click on my account, I'm going to go to licenses and apps. If I scroll down, I can see M365 Copilot is assigned to my particular account. So I've got that prerequisite already ticked. If you don't have this, but you do have the license available, click on it and then press Save Changes, and you will have this available. A good way to check is if you go to copilot.microsoft.com, I think it's called, and we're going to go to work in this case. A good telling way to see this is if you have M365 Copilot Premium here on the bottom left corner. Here it's written. Okay, so now we've checked that, we've got the license prerequisite already. We need to tick some other boxes. So Cowork uses the Anthropic sub-processor. So to actually make the use of Cowork, we need to turn Anthropic availability on within our tenant. The way that we do that is we go to Copilot here on the top, we go to settings, we go to view all, and we look for sub-processors. Here it is. We click on this, and we have to make sure that Anthropic is enabled. I've already enabled it over here, but if you haven't enabled it, it will come up as a tick box that you have to click. You have to agree to the terms of service, because of course Anthropic handle data differently to Microsoft, and you need to press save. Now, GPT currently is in the frontier models, but it's not currently in production. It's not generally available. So right now, at this time of recording, you do need to enable Anthropic. However, depending on when you're watching this, this may have changed, so do reference Microsoft documentation to see this, as this requirement may have been lifted. Now that's ticked, we need to enable usage-based billing, right? And this is where the consumption model really takes into place. And the way that we do that is we go to cost management here, we click on this, and you can see here, it will actually show me my consumption because I have usage-based billing activated. If you don't see this kind of dashboardy look, you'll see a big blue button that says enable usage-based billing that you need to click and you need to apply to your tenant. Cowork will not work without this right now. You just won't see it within your environment. So this needs to be enabled at this time of recording. Then the final thing that you need to do, and this one can catch you out, is you need to go to the agents pane here. You need to go to all agents and you need to look for Cowork here with the search box. Just type it in. And here it says available, but you need to ensure that you click on these ellipses and you press install. Now here I have it installed, so I've already got this. But if you don't have it, it will say install. You need to click on it, and then it will install Cowork within your machine, or within your tenant, I should say. Now, the way that you can actually see if you've got Cowork enabled is if you go to the M365 Copilot app, in this case, so I'm just using the desktop application. You can also use the cloud application. And you can see here on the left-hand side, I have chat and I have Cowork available. And if you didn't do the previous steps, then you won't see Cowork. If you did do them and did them well, then you'll see Cowork over here. So now we're going to cover what Copilot Cowork is, right? So we're going to be laying the foundation, the theoretical foundation, if you would, for Copilot Cowork, what the value proposition is, why use Microsoft. And by the end of this module, the idea is that you have a good theoretical understanding of Copilot Cowork so you can best make use of it. So the first thing we're going to cover is chat versus Cowork. So what is the differences between the two? I feel like in some ways they are self-explanatory, but in others, I think it's valuable to just break down the differences, since Cowork is usage-based at this time of recording and chat currently isn't. So I think it's really important to understand the distinction between the two, when you'd use which, and then also understanding a little bit better the value proposition of Cowork. So the main litmus test, right? Again, probably self-explanatory, but I think it's important to speak about here. If you have a question, we're going to move to chat, right? If you have a job, if you have something to hand over, if you have a deliverable that you need, then we're going to give that to Cowork. Are you asking a question, or are you handing over a job that needs a clear deliverable back for you? And this would allow you to decide if you should go with Copilot or if you should go with Cowork. Now, as I said in the beginning of this masterclass, Cowork can really change the way that you work on a day-to-day basis if you utilize it properly. Here are some points that make Cowork different, both within the Microsoft ecosystem and out. And the first one is cloud hosting, which I think is quite important. Cloud hosting basically means that when you utilize Cowork, you can shut off your computer and it will continue to do that work for you. You can check into that work using your mobile, the M365 Copilot application. So you have a continuous process if things are taking a bit longer. And with Cowork, things can take very long. Then we've got Work IQ, which I think is one of the most unique value propositions for Cowork. Microsoft basically dominates the business ecosystem from a cloud perspective. So many companies use Excel, PowerPoint to deliver a lot of deliverables within that business. And Work IQ is Microsoft's answer for bringing all of those different tools together, things like Outlook, things like Dynamics, things like Excel, things like OneDrive, storing all of that organizational context, all of your conversations, everything, so Cowork and Copilot can utilize this effectively. Now, again, I think Work IQ is a unique value proposition because Microsoft owns so much of the business market when it comes to the cloud. So if you're having conversations in Outlook or Teams, and those are being bounced around, Cowork and Copilot can use that context together to deliver better outputs. So Work IQ, we're going to get into it more deeply in a specific lesson for it, but just understand that it's a very unique value proposition for Copilot Cowork. Then third, we have a multimodal system, right? So you can use the Anthropic processes as we saw. You can also use GPT now in Frontier, or you can use Auto, where it will basically choose the best model for that particular task. Then we've got usage billing, which again is very different to chat. Usage billing is basically getting you to pay for only what you use, which can both be a gift and a curse. A lot of people aren't taking nicely to this, so I'm assuming this might change in the future. I just think it's going to be very difficult for Microsoft to change that right now because, of course, they are paying Anthropic to use their models within Cowork, and then they need to charge a premium on that so then they can have a margin themselves. And then finally, the enterprise security that you know and love from Microsoft, right? Why are so many companies using Microsoft technology? It is because they trust the technology. They trust the security. Microsoft have been world-renowned in security. And the truth is, people just trust this technology a little bit more than they might some of the new players like OpenAI and Anthropic. So these are the 5 differences, in my opinion, that make Cowork a little bit different to other technologies or even M365 Copilot Chat. So let's speak a little bit about Work IQ, because this is really the context engine that I think Microsoft prides themselves on having a unique proposition throughout the market and fuels Cowork the best, in my opinion, and complements the product so much. Now, we spoke a little bit about this before, but Work IQ is the context engine that fuels Microsoft. The idea behind it is all of your contacts from conversations, emails, drives, the cloud, kind of any interaction that you've had can be stored within this Work IQ. And it's basically an organizational profile to understand who you are and the way that you work best. Your language, the way you talk, your sentiments, your relationships within the company, who you speak to the most. These things Work IQ can pick up on through patterns and, of course, data recognition. Now I'm on Microsoft Learn, and this is the Work IQ overview, right? I'm not going to read all this out for you, but I think this diagram really depicts the value of Work IQ, having that organizational intelligence here and allowing your agents to connect into that intelligence so it can best understand the way that you work. If you scroll down within this article, you can find different areas that it talks about regarding the API, the chat, the context, the tools available, how it integrates with workspaces, some security information as well, and this will be linked. So you can go and take a look at this yourself. You can also access the WorkIQ API independent of M365 Copilot licensing through usage-based billing. So the idea and value of Cowork is that it understands your work. It understands the way you work, the way you speak, the way you talk, and the way you communicate with others. And this is going to be utilized throughout this masterclass as well. So I was just thought it was important to introduce. And if you're interested in having a deeper read, then go and take a look at the Microsoft documentation. Now within Cowork, I want to speak a little bit about the model layer, right? Because you do have options for the model that you use within Cowork. Now, we're not going to get super deep into this, but I do want to visualize for you the different options that you have available at this time of recording. Now, of course, the model names are definitely subject to change. You might be familiar with the notorious Claude and Fable story and then going back to Opus. So this definitely will change in the future in terms of the different models that you have access to. But rather than kind of look at the model names, I want you to focus more on this kind of colored code over here in terms of what each model does best. I believe there'll always be an option, even if it's not these specific models, to have something that's for fast everyday tasks, have something that's for high stakes reasoning, and have something which is automatic where Cowork picks the best model for your task. Now, for most people, they will just use Auto because it is the simplest. It is the one that you don't have to worry so much about. But if you're doing something which is quite important or something that's going to take a lot more reasoning, then Opus, of course, is the best model to use right now. You have Sonnet, which I think works really well and isn't used enough, in my opinion. I feel like when we use AI, we always want the best in class, so we default to Opus. But I think Sonnet could be really valuable here as well. And again, we're going to go through the pricing in more detail going forward. But since this is usage-based billing, we want to be very particular about the models that we're using, which is why I always say default to Auto, because I think it's a good middle ground between having a good outcome and also saving a lot of cost. So this is my recommendation for using the right model over here. Then you might notice here on the right-hand side, we have GPT 5.5, which is currently in the Frontier preview. And notoriously, these are really good at research, any sort of long form task as well, it can be quite good at. But in my opinion, right now, the best in class models are the Anthropic models. But if you have any data residency issues, then GPT 5.5 would be the one to use. Now, what I'd love to do is go through where Cowork lives, right? Because I think sometimes it can be a little bit confusing with the different Microsoft technologies, like what does this actually have access to and where can I access it from? So we want to understand how to enable Cowork everywhere. Now, Cowork can access your M365 stack in a lot of different ways. Of course, you can access it through the browser and desktop through Copilot Chat. It has access to different M365 tools like Teams and Outlook. Of course, it outputs predominantly to OneDrive and SharePoint if you direct it to. But I think two of the most important points that I want you to take from this lesson is the cloud execution and also mobile, iOS, and Android. And I think these points go really well together because the value proposition of Cowork is that it goes and does work for you, right? And that wouldn't be very useful if as soon as you shut your computer down, it shuts down, which is why Cowork executes in the cloud predominantly. Now, let's say, for example, you've given Cowork a brief and you've shut off your computer. You can still access what Cowork is doing through your mobile. So you download the M365 Copilot app and any sort of point that it needs to contact you or ask questions or kind of dig a layer deeper, you can have that communication within the application. So the idea is you start anywhere and you can pick it up anywhere. Basically taking the scenario that I've got and visualizing it over here. If you're on a commute, you can brief Cowork on your phone. While you're away, the task executes in the background, and at your desk, when you come back and you're back from your commute, the result is ready to review. And this kind of cross-device capability is really where Cowork shines. So being able to utilize it like this, understanding where it lives, understanding what it can do for you in your flow of work allows you to utilize this technology the best. So we've talked Cowork up, we've explained how you can use it, where you can use it, we've set it up, we've done all the good stuff, but I would honestly be doing you a disservice if I didn't talk about when not to use Cowork and giving you a decision matrix, to understand when you probably shouldn't use it. Because again, with usage-based billing, with the costs of Cowork right now, you can find yourself using a lot of credits and not getting a lot of work done. So let's understand when we shouldn't use Cowork. As I said, right now, Cowork is very expensive, right? We want to be careful with the way that we're using it, and we want the value proposition for what we're going to get to be worth what we're putting in. Knowing when not to delegate is a skill itself, right? So I've given you a bit of a matrix to understand when you should probably go with chat, do something yourself, and not delegate something. If it's a quick question or answer, again, self-explanatory, you would reach for chat in this case, right? You don't use any credits and you get an instant answer. So this is much better. If you're brainstorming or thinking out loud and something is helping you work, helping you do your work as you're kind of engaging within it and not having the work done for you, then using a chat interface, again, I think is a lot better. Then if something is trivial, right? If you've determined it's not worth the credits, if something takes you 5 minutes or 10 minutes, Cowork might cost more than it actually saves. So do keep that in mind when you're looking at doing this for trivial tasks. You might also default to some of the native Copilot capabilities within applications. Things like Excel, things like Word. These all have Copilot baked in, which is getting a lot better. So if you just need to put some headers within one of your Word documents, just use the Copilot that you have within there, rather than actually delegating a whole stream of work to Cowork and paying that price. If the task is still too vague to brief, then I wouldn't delegate this. I would always try and sharpen the brief first. Always make sure that you have the context and the ideas and everything in mind that Cowork needs to build a successful output. You don't want to give it a really vague brief. It will spend, I don't know, an hour or 30 minutes actually trying to put something together, spending a ton of credits, and not giving you the output that you require. You want to make sure that a lot of your time investment goes into your brief so it doesn't need to go in fixing what Cowork has done for you. Then if something is high stakes, right? And this is not a controversial one. I think we all understand to some capacity that we shouldn't give AI everything. But the question might be, if something is high stakes and takes a lot of time, but Cowork can do it well, should I give it to Cowork? In my opinion, the answer is yes, as long as you're checking the work that it's doing. But if something is high stakes and the brief is too vague, for example, then this would not be a good example to use Cowork. And now when we're talking about high stakes, we're also talking about data. Is this data you probably shouldn't expose? Is this data where if it got into the wrong hand, we'd be running into problems? If the answer is yes, then at this time of recording, I would not point this at Cowork. Cowork can make mistakes. It might surface in a place where it shouldn't surface. It might do something which isn't good or within the requirements of the data that you have. So I wouldn't delegate this if it's definitely data that you shouldn't expose by any means necessary. Always ask yourself, is this worth the credits, right? Before any Cowork task, before even having a thought about delegating something, understand and ask yourself, is it actually worth the credits that I'm going to be using here? Now, it's not always easy to estimate the credits that you're going to be using for a particular task. And within the pricing segment, we're going to get into that a little bit further. But give yourself a baseline of how long you think something would take and if the Copilot credits would be worth it in the end. Now, we have finished module 1. We have a good foundation in terms of Cowork, how it works, what it is, the value proposition. So here's 5 things that I'd like you to carry into the rest of the masterclass, which if you're going to take anything, it should be these 5 key takeaways. The first one is the difference between chat and Cowork. The idea and value proposition of Cowork is that it gives you a completed result, rather than just a draft of something you're asking for. If you're going to start using Cowork, the first question you should be asking is if it's something that you can delegate, that outputs a completed result. And if the answer is yes, then we look into the value proposition and if it makes sense. But that's always the first thing we want to distinguish. Should we be using chat for this or should we be using Cowork? Then work IQ, right? This is the grounding layer of Cowork and Copilot. This goes into your organizational data, your projects, your emails, your files. It understands your colleagues and it outputs the best results based off of that. Then we've got a multi-model system. It's always auto by default, and this is the one that I recommend using. You would only override this for things that are high stakes, or maybe things that are fast or a bit more routine like Sonnet, but you can trust the auto to handle that for you as it best understands what it should be using. It is available everywhere that Microsoft 365 runs. It keeps working when your laptop is closed, right? So this is the cloud execution layer that we spoke about. If you turn off your laptop, Cowork can still do the work for you. And then the final point is only use Cowork when you want to delegate and when the task is worth the credit. So it complements one where we've decided Cowork is what we want to use rather than chat. And we want to understand how long would this take me to do and how long would this take Cowork to do and how much would that cost? So now we're going to be talking about Cowork licensing. We're going to understand credits, cost, and also staying in control of all of that. You can see this big monster here because this is, again, a bit of a controversial topic with the way licensing is. And I do want to say, and just pretense this this module to say, licensing changed in the Microsoft space very, very quickly. So I'm going to be giving you resources to keep up with the licensing. This is just the way that this is working as of June 2026. So do keep an eye on this space, and if it does change, then make sure that you're adjusting this to adhere to the different changes. Now, first we want to understand how Cowork pricing works in particular. We're going to understand credits and also the 4 inputs that add up to make the cost. The first thing we're going to be discussing, and we spoke about this already, mentioned it multiple times throughout the different areas and lessons and modules, is usage-based billing. And with Cowork, you're not paying per question, but you're paying for the work that is done. So Cowork is all built on the usage, which is going to be measured in Copilot credits. Now, I've got a detailed Microsoft Learn space here on usage-based billing that we're going to open and just quickly go through so we can use their wording to understand this a little bit further. If you open this up, you can see that the idea behind this is to provide a flexible option rather than just fixed licensing. Now, there are fixed licensing options available, but if you're just getting started with Cowork, then usage-based billing is probably the best place that you can start with, in my opinion. The fixed licensing is for extreme bulk use, which you probably won't be doing if you've just rolled this out or if you're just thinking about rolling this out. So I would always start with usage-based billing and then scaling from there. Now, as I showed you in the video of actually getting set up with Cowork, once you go to the admin center, if you open up this, you can see what it would look like if you don't have usage-based billing available. You can see immediately if you press get started that you will get the dashboard experience. And you can see if we open the admin center, go to cost management, you can see the usage-based billing reportability features over here, stating how many Copilot credits were used. And if I go to consumption, you can see exactly the agents and services that are used and also the users too. Now you can see I don't have a monthly limit. You can add monthly limits to particular users, and the way that you do that is you just click on them, you can go to manage limits, and you can set them a particular policy, their billing method in particular, any email alerting as well. So you can see you can get very granular about how much you're spending so you're not having surprise bills. Now, something we will go through is the P3 pre-purchase plan, and this is the fixed licensing that I was telling you about. And if I click on this, it will open up the pre-purchase plan documentation, and you can see immediately the ranges of Copilot credits that you'd have to use is quite high because the example they give is 1.5 million. So this is the other option, but again, really fuels why I think pay as you go is the way forward. Now, I think it's important to understand the core mechanic behind this, and it really just stems from 4 main inputs. What model you're using, what context it's actually going to retrieve, the amount of tools, skills, or plugins that are involved along the way, and how long a specific task actually ran for. Now, you can influence all 4 of these with your brief, the model use being a little bit more particular, so you can use a lighter model if you want. But in my opinion, if you put a sharper brief together, it's usually the cheaper option, and you will get the cheapest outcome. So if you have a brief, which is not too specific, but specific enough where Cowork doesn't get confused and is kind of going around and looking for different information and sources and areas that it doesn't need to go to, and you can kind of steer Cowork away from that, then this would be the cheaper outcome for you. Now, there's 3 particular bands that Cowork really falls into when it justifies doing a task. There is a light band, a medium, and then also a heavy. Now, I don't need to explain to you kind of the differences between the 3. I'm sure you can mentally picture what a light task would look like, what a medium task would look like, and what a heavy task would look like. Light being kind of very limited reasoning, few sources, etc., while heavy probably being aggregating deep reasoning, research, putting together slide decks, etc. This is kind of the way that Cowork will band the level of task that it runs. Now, I think this is quite important because if you can justify in your head, okay, I think this would be a light task, or I think this would be kind of a medium task, it would allow you to also kind of better estimate the cost of what you're going to be spending. But I think mentally just picturing these 3 areas is a good step before using Cowork. Now, we spoke about good briefs, and a sharper brief isn't just better quality, but it's often cheaper. So if you have a very clear brief, it stops Cowork from over-retrieving, as we spoke about, or wandering, and overall will just make for better delegation. Now, I definitely don't want to bore you to death with licensing, but this is going to be the last section where we speak about pricing and licensing, and this is going to be around budgeting and estimating your spend. And the main goal through this lesson is for you to understand the different ways that you can pay for Cowork, which we have alluded to, but I'm going to take you through the official Microsoft documentation, what it shows, and kind of where I think this is going in the future, because I don't think usage or consumption-based billing is going to be the future for Cowork, but we're going to get into that during this lesson. Now, right now, there are two payment models that you've got. You've got PayGo, which is pay as you go, and you've got P3 to lock in savings, right? So we spoke about this. I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but pay as you go is you just pay for what you use, and prepaid commitment is you pay a bulk fee upfront and you get a set amount of credits. And this is for more so if you're kind of committing to a lot more volume. Pay as you go for most of you listening is going to be the place that you want to start. This is going to be a very good starting point, and then P3 is of course a bit more of a commitment. Now, if we open up that link that was in the slide, we can go through the generally available announcement for Copilot Cowork. Now, if you scroll down, you'll see, it says what makes Cowork different, and then immediately goes through the pricing model because it's the one people have had the most questions about. And if I zoom into this, you can see the different usage variables for the amount of Copilot credits consumed is with the models, the context, the tools, the runtime, what we all spoke about. And this is a really nice diagram to kind of put it in perspective for the way Cowork will consume your credits. Now, if we click out of this and scroll down, we see the breakdown of the light task, the medium task, and also the heavy tasks, and also the estimated Copilot credits here across the bottom, which is to be taken with a grain of salt, of course, but again, can justify in your mind exactly how much this would be spending. And I really think the best practice, and in terms of the pricing element of Cowork, is trying to mentally picture and decide what you're willing to spend before you spend it. Really putting the value on the work that you're going to be getting and the time you're going to be winning back, and what's going to go instead of that time that you will be winning back from Cowork. So for example, if you're just spending the time watching Netflix and you've got Cowork working in the background, then maybe that's not the best use of your time and also Cowork energy in that perspective, and also the credits that's used there. So make sure the task is worth the credits that are going into it. So here's 4 things to carry forward into the next modules. The first one is Cowork is built on usage in Copilot credits. It's not like chat where you pay for a subscription and you can kind of speak to it and converse with it in a long form kind of way, and you won't be billed for any additional usage. It is all based on the usage that you're actually utilizing. The cost is built from the model, the context, the tools, the time, and is banded as a light, medium, or heavy task. You've got 2 different payment options available, pay as you go and then P3. And you can set your budgets within the M365 Admin Center, and you should do so before using it to make sure that you've kind of capped your spend so you're not paying a crazy amount of money. Final thing on pricing before we kind of move on to the next elements is how to estimate your monthly spend. Now, Microsoft do have this customer Cowork estimator available. I'm not sure how long this is going to be maintained or used for. It is just something that you can use now, which kind of uses this formula to estimate your total monthly spend on Cowork. So in case you're interested, this is what the spreadsheet looks like. You have different steps that you can kind of populate and fill out, and this will be in the description if you're interested in taking a look. And you basically just fill out this step by step, and it will always assume Anthropic Opus 4.8. So again, I don't know how long they're going to be maintaining this because the models change very quickly and also the costs, but it could be something to get started with if you're looking to get started immediately. Okay, so we're finally in the interface, and here we are really going to start exploring how Cowork looks, how it works, some of the moving pieces that help it. And by the end of this, you'll have an overall idea of how the interface can help you achieve your goals. So the first thing, we are in the M365 Copilot application. You might be able to tell because we have a lack of a browser. So we are in the desktop application where this can work too. I highly recommend doing it from the desktop application if you can, just because I always feel it's a little bit more supported in some regard. Obviously it runs locally, so I always prefer to do it on here, but if you do it on the cloud, the interface will be pretty much the same. Now, the first thing you'll see when you open the application is you'll have a chat and you will have a Cowork interface. Now, you don't need me to explain to you what the difference is. We've already gone through that, but what you want to do is come into Cowork here on the top left-hand corner. Then next to this, we have the AI model, and here we can choose the model that we want to run Cowork on. You can see we have Claude Sonnet, we have Opus, and we have 5.5, but of course these models can differ as time goes on. They will get better, they'll get more efficient, and I believe GPT 5.5 is currently in the Frontier program, so use this with caution. Right now, the more supported models are the Anthropic models over here. Then on the left-hand side, we have different areas available to us. We have new task, and if we click on this, it will just open this chat interface, which by now you are very used to. Very similar to ChatGPT, Copilot, Claude, whatever have you. You have a text interface over here. You can format the text if you'd like. You can also speak to it. And you have some pre-built prompts over here that you can use. And you can see the briefing templates that it gives you are quite detailed, probably more detailed than you're used to seeing in a regular chat interface. And then here on the left-hand side, we have my tasks. And this is really what makes Cowork different to chat. A chat is more of a thread and a task is something with a life cycle, right? So it's going to be running, waiting on you, or done. You can filter over here by what needs your input, what is in progress, what is complete, what is scheduled, and what is unread. So here is basically your task list of what Cowork is doing. And if anything needs your input, you can filter it over here and effectively see all of the tasks. Then we've got scheduled here on the left-hand side, and these are where recurring jobs live. So this is where delegation happens without you even typing anything into the interface or showing up. If you press create, you can run these on a schedule. It will even paste a prompt available to you within Cowork. So it can basically go and create that scheduled task for you. Cowork will trace through the steps over here just to find what it needs to do. And then it will ask you detailed for the scheduled tasks and what it needs. It gives you a breakdown of what scheduled tasks are. And now it's going to ask us some questions to try and figure out what we'd like set up through this very similar Claude interface if you're used to using that. So we're not going to do that now. We're just going to press X and we're going to pause and we're going to let that go. What we can also do now we've opened this is we can click the ellipsis and we can rename this specific chat or we can delete it. And in this case, we are going to delete. And then we've got customize here on the left-hand side. And do remember this one because it opens the door to plugins and skills. Now we're going to go over the difference between plugins and skills later on in the masterclass. And they have a whole module in its own. But this is where Cowork stops becoming generic and starts working in the way that you want it to work. You can see the different plugins that are available and you can show more. So these are the ones that are pre-built from Microsoft. And then if we go to skills, you can see the list of skills that are available as well. There are a few built-in skills already here. Things like PowerPoint, HTML, calendar management, scheduling. These are all things that people, are likely to do on a day-to-day basis. So Microsoft have integrated these into the technology. But you might find here in the top that you can also add your own skills over here, either by uploading a skill or just creating it from here. And again, you can see a lot of the interface once you click the buttons comes into the chat interface so it can help you build those things out. So Cowork is helping you make Cowork better, effectively. It feels like we're very much in the future. You'll notice over here a workspace area has popped out for us within this chat interface. And through the workspace, we can actually see particularly what skills are being called, the thought process as well, and if any artifacts appear, they will show up within the workspace area. You can see again, it's asking us through this questionnaire format what we want the skill to do. But in this case, we can just close this out and we can go and refer to this in a later module. We're going to delete this again. And you can see if I hover over this, we'll see exactly the process that's going on. And in this case, it says it's working. We've currently stopped that, so I'm not sure that's going to update, but we can just delete this now as well. Now, let's talk about the input box here in the middle. Now, you can add attachments, which is, things that you're familiar with already. You can call particular plugins and skills over here, attach cloud files, again, upload any images and files here. And the unique one is adding work context. So if I click on this, you can see people within my organization. And I have different tabs here available to me, which integrates with Work IQ to determine if I want to call anyone within my organizational setting. So if I go to skills, I have different skills available, people within the organization. I've got files, any meetings, emails, chats, channels, sites, which are SharePoint sites in particular. So this is really querying your Work IQ so you can actually reference these different areas. So if I reference this test site, you can see it comes up as a dynamic element within the chat, and now it will know exactly what site I'm talking about. So this is a really unique way that you can put briefs together. And if you remember the anatomy of a brief, sources are really important. So actually saying, okay, this is the site that I want you to ground yourself on, or this is what I want you to understand. You can put direct links to that within this chat input. So we're going to delete this for now. But I thought it'd be helpful to just see the way Work IQ does operate within Cowork. Now, we're just going to run a quick prompt because I just want to show you how Cowork kind of structures itself when it's working and any different dynamic elements that come through. So we're going to have a very lazy input and we're just going to say, organize my inbox. Press enter. And again, we have this same kind of new chat interface that opens up for us. It's going to run through the details and let's see if it's smart enough to actually ask questions about the way that we'd like to organize our inbox. Now, this is looking at my actual Outlook inbox, so there might be some areas here I have to blur. But if I click on the thinking reasoning here, you can see it will give me a detailed breakdown of exactly what it's looking at. If I close this out, it says it's reviewed the inbox. It has 502 messages, 386 unread. We have a solid set of folders as well for things like notifications, invoice, receipts, newsletters, etc. And now it says, before I start moving hundreds of messages around, let me confirm how you want to approach it. And it's actually given us this questionnaire, and this will be something that's very familiar to you when you use Cowork. And if you're using Claude, it's something you're already familiar with, but it generates a set of questions that you can either add to or you can just select over here. And it's asking us what we want exactly. So in this case, we just want to file the automated clutter only. So things like GitHub and Vercel build comments. We're just going to press next. And it says, what do we want to actually do? All 502 messages or only the recent 75? And in this case, we're just going to say the recent ones. So we're going to submit that. And you can see now it's actually going to go off and start doing the work for us. So it's accepted and it's given us the steps here in the workspace. And now it's asking us email by email if we want it moved. Now, here's where Cowork can both get very powerful and very dangerous. What we can do is every email that it asks us for, we can come in and press move, but obviously that's going to take a lot from us to come in and check all the emails. We may as well just do it ourselves. So we can go into here and we can select always allow move message. And if we press this, for this particular chat window, we have basically granted Cowork access to always be able to move messages for the remainder of this chat. So in this case, I'm happy with this because we're doing it with just dev emails and nothing super important. So we're just going to press always allow, but be very careful when you're actually doing this yourself. Now, if I open this up, you can see all of the tasks it's executing. You can see there's a bit of a bug right now, and it's doing a lot of different changes. So it's moving a lot of emails into that folder. And just like that, it has finished. So it's finished very quickly. It's moved 34 of the emails out of the inbox into my dev notifications folder. And if I actually open up my emails, we can see in the dev notifications, all those things have been moved effectively. What's really cool and I like about Cowork as well is when you've allowed it permissions that are always allowed, it will store them in your workspace. So you can basically remove this and revoke the permission so they can't do that anymore, basically. So if you've accidentally pressed it by mistake, or it's made a mistake and you don't want it to do that anymore, you can revoke those permissions and basically iterate on it until it gets it right. So this was an introduction to the Cowork interface. So I hope you have a better understanding of how this all looks, how it works, and how we're going to operate this. And we're going to have a really cool use case throughout this masterclass that we're going to iteratively build on so you can understand all of the concepts like plugins, like skills, and apply them within your work and within practice too. So I'm super excited to do that. So before we get into some more practical examples of using Cowork and utilizing the technology that we have, I want to go through a very important theoretical lesson on the anatomy of what a good Cowork brief is, right? And the reason I'm doing this is because I genuinely believe that if you master the brief, then you've pretty much mastered Cowork, because you are delegating a job with a clear definition of done. You are writing things within the brief that Cowork needs to do, what it doesn't need to do, adding constraints, adding formatting. If you can get the brief right, your outputs would be so much better. So I really want to break down in this lesson the different points that you need to hit within a brief. And don't get me wrong, AI technology is getting better and better, and Cowork will steer correctly. If you've given too vague a brief and it's not specific enough, it will ask you questions to understand a little bit more. But the more specific you can be with your brief, really the better value that you're going to get from Cowork. Now, the anatomy of a good brief really just comes to 6 main points that you need to hit: the outcome, the source, the operation, the format, the judgment, and then the constraints. Let's go through each one specifically, what it means, and maybe even an example. So an outcome, what does done actually look like, right? So if we're trying to reach a goal with Cowork, which if we're using it, it is what we're trying to do. We want an outcome, we want to save time, or we want to do something very well. What does that actually look like for us? When am I going to be happy with the outcome that Cowork has given me? We need to define this very specifically so that Cowork knows when to be satisfied and when it can give us something that we can actually see and is tangible. Then the sources, right? Which files, which emails, what data should it draw on in particular? If you have a specific OneDrive folder where it needs to look at the contacts and look at the Excel files or PowerPoints that you have in there, then point it to that specific OneDrive folder. We saw in the last lesson that within Cowork, you can basically attach different files, different areas directly from OneDrive. So you can have that reference within it and be very specific on the sources that it needs to use. Then we've got operation, right? What is it actually doing? Is it building something? Is it comparing? Is it giving us a draft? We need to define what we want Cowork to do. Then we have the format, right? What do we want the tangible outcome to be? This is where Cowork really thrives. Is it a list? Is it a Word document? Is it a slide deck? Is it a table? Is it an Excel spreadsheet? The format is really important to get right, because if you're expecting a PowerPoint presentation and it gives you a bulleted list and you haven't defined that, then that will be a problem, of course. So we always need to define the format. Then we have judgment, right? So we want to add a row, a line, something to basically just say what's important, what's urgent, what's in scope, give it that additional context, give it that layer to reason through. If you say something is very important, if you say something needs to be looked at in particular, if it's making a slide deck and you say, all right, slide 3 on this title needs, extra work, extra judgment, then Cowork will steer in the right direction to put extra emphasis on that area. So we do want to add a layer of judgment. Not too much, of course, because we don't want to constrain Cowork, but enough so it has that context. And then the final point on here, which I think is one of the most important, is constraints. And if you've done any classes on prompt engineering, or you've been using AI for a while, you'll understand how important constraints are. What should it not do, right? What should it exclude? How much should the length be? What should the tone be, right? We want to be very clear on what we don't want it to do as much as what we do want it to do. So give it the guardrails, give it the parameters that it can work within so it doesn't venture out of that. And then here at the bottom, I've just got a very simple example of using most of these points. This uses everything but the outcome, and the idea is that we'd have a line or two describing all of these different points, and then we'd have a final line describing the outcome. And to really hit this point home, here is an example of having the same task being basically written in two different ways. We have a very lazy brief where it's just, organize my inbox. So something very arbitrary. We don't really have a lot of context to this. Cowork doesn't have a lot to go off. And the funny thing is, if you do put something like this, Cowork will get you to clarify, like, what do you mean by organize my inbox? What constraints do you want me to hit? What do you want me to work within? And it will ask you to get to a better outcome. But a sharper brief will be summarize unread emails from the last 3 days, group by project, flag what needs my reply this week, etc., etc. Right? We have the action that it needs to do. We have the constraints. We have the short bulleted list as a output, as the format that it should give us that specific outcome in. And a sharp brief ultimately will just lead to more finished and usable work from Cowork, which is what we are gearing this masterclass towards. So a use case for us actually working with Cowork, because I think it's going to be quite important that you can visualize how this can work for you. So rather than us just going through something very arbitrary and just doing random things like summarizing inboxes, etc. You know it can do that stuff. The examples are there. What I actually want to put together is a mission where we are trying to launch a product together. The idea is we have an idea for a new booking tool to complete with Calendly called Pulse. We now need to get this idea in front of leadership, which we will do so using Cowork. And this is really good because it actually gives us a list of outputs that we need to launch that particular product. And what we're going to do is we're going to use Cowork step by step to create all of these outputs for us so we can hit our goal of actually launching a product. And the idea here, if you're trying to launch a product, then great. This is going to be very specific for your scenario, but most of you probably aren't trying to do that. But what it's going to do is it's going to show you all of the different pillars that Cowork works on. So then you can relate those to your day-to-day tasks and then utilize the areas that you need and ignore the ones that you don't. So what we're going to need is a product brief for what we're trying to launch. We're going to need market research to understand if there's a real market and show where this product fits. We're going to need a business case, so we're going to turn this idea into numbers, getting the costs and revenue. Then we're going to need a meeting prep, so we need to get ready to face the decision makers. And then we're going to need to assemble a presentation that's ready to put in front of leadership. So a slide deck to go with the meeting prep that we do. So these are the steps that we're going to look to finish with Cowork. And we're going to work end to end until we have hit this outcome, steering correctly and making sure that we are happy with what we are receiving. So let's get started putting our use case together within Cowork. So if I open up my slides, you can see that we've gone over the mission, we know what we need to do, and we've got the product brief and market research to do first. Now, I'm very happy to combine both of these documents together since one of them is a light task and one of them is a medium task, and it will really utilize the way that it can combine both market research and a product brief within one specific prompt. So I've got this Northwind Pulse kind of document just to ground the agent in kind of what we're trying to build, saying it's a smart scheduling and booking tool for businesses and freelancers, etc., with a few different titles. So not a lot of substance in this PDF document, but we're going to use it to ground Cowork in what we're trying to build. So if I open up Cowork, the first prompt that we're going to give it is this. We're going to say, using the attached product brief, create a polished one-page product overview for Northwind Pulse as a Word document, right? So we've given it that specific format. We're going to say, pull the key points from the brief, what it is, who it's for, and the value proposition, then research the online scheduling and booking market, and add a short section covering 3 to 4 main competitors like Calendly and Microsoft Bookings, how each positions itself, and how Pulse is positioned differently. It then says finish with 3 open questions we still need to resolve before launch. Now, here we've said given it a one-page product overview, but I'm actually going to extend this to 3 pages because I think 1 page is a little bit too kind of narrow for, especially if we're combining the market research as well. So what I'm going to do is just attach the document to this. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to press this add attachment, and we're just going to upload the files. And now that's attached, we are going to press send. So you can see from here, it's going to start working on this request. It's going to read the product brief first, and it's going to build the Word document for us. You can see it's created the steps here in the top right-hand side, what it's going to do. And if it asks us any questions, it will surface within the chat interface as well. Let's break down specifically what it's doing. So if we see this, we can see the different websites that it's actually looking for competitors on. We can see the thought process here as well, saying that there's tension in the requirements. And it's actually detected that we've, said 1 page, but then we've said 3 pages as well, which is why we've said the brief is so important. It's decided to target 3 pages overall, but keep it tight and confident, since it's defined that this is probably the best length for what we're actually trying to achieve. So it's reasoned off that discrepancy in the brief. And I think this really highlights that the prompt doesn't have to be perfect. We have to make the brief as good as it can be, but it will resolve itself when it needs to. But because we have that discrepancy of 1 page here and then 3 pages across the top here, it has actually found that within its reasoning. It's preparing to work within the Word documents, and then you can see here it's putting together the scripts and everything that it needs. Within our next module, we're going to be exploring skills and plugins, but you can see here it's actually used the word skill. And if we open this up, you can see that this is a built-in skill from Microsoft. And if we go into the customize layer, you can see that Microsoft have some of these built-in skills to work with Cowork. Things like Excel, Word, PowerPoint, these are all available natively, so Cowork can build using some of these files. So if we check back into the process, we can see it's actually failed to verify the document that was created. Not sure why that is, but we'll see what it actually ends up generating. You can see now that the output is pretty much finished. It's added it to the workspace here on the right-hand side that we can actually go in and review. It's still checking, so we're going to wait for it to finish over here. And now it's given us the finished outcome. So if I open up this document to see what it's done, we get this preview layer within Cowork. We can see the product overview, who it's for, the value proposition, the landscape as well with the different competitors, and how we're going to position ourselves differently here across the bottom. We've also got 3 open questions as we asked for, so it's given us that Word document quite easily. Now, obviously, you're going to have to check this, make sure it's correct, etc. But for the scope of this course, since we're bearing with the fact it's just an example, let's say we're okay with this. Now, nothing too special. We've grounded it in some knowledge. It's gone and produced a Word document. Nothing you can't do with Claude or Copilot chat anyway. So what we're going to do is just close the preview, and we're going to run the next prompt. Now, the next prompt will be to create the business case spreadsheet, right? So if we go back into our slides over here, you can see the next thing that we want is to turn the ideas into numbers, right? What's the cost going to be, the revenue, the price structure, etc. We're going to go ahead and add this prompt here to build a business case spreadsheet for launching Northwind Pulse. It says simple here, but what I'm going to do is actually test Cowork and say build a detailed spreadsheet for launching this. We want to include 3 pricing tiers, Starter, Growth, and Pro, with suggested monthly prices, a first-year revenue projection based on modest customer growth, estimated launch and running costs as well, and a rough break-even point. Then the final point, again, to format this is to put it into a clean Excel file with the assumptions clearly listed so I can change them. What I also want to add at the bottom is just say, please, if you have any questions that you need answers before you start working, do let me know. And this is just giving it an extra layer In case it hasn't figured everything out, we can just add that extra layer of protection to make sure that, we're steering it in the right direction. So we're going to send this and we're going to see what it outputs for us. You can see it's now doing the thinking and reasoning in the same way. It says the request is pretty straightforward. It says it doesn't think it needs to ask clarifying questions, which is fine, I guess. And now it's preparing to work with the Excel spreadsheets. Now, while this runs, it is taking a little while. So I do want to speak a little bit about multitasking with AI, because I think a lot of us are prone to just come in here and watch this kind of work and maybe look at specifically what it's doing and be concerned about it failing, etc. But I think we're moving more and more into a space where working with multiple AI agents together at the same time is probably the best place to be. So whereas I've got kind of one thing running here, you can see I have a pure ability to come in to add a new task, and then this would run alongside these ones as well. So the reason I speak about this and just add this as a little bit of nugget of information here, I really do think we're moving into a position where we are going to have multiple tabs going on, and we can make arguments for context switching and how that's going to work, and if we're actually going to be doing the work properly, but actually having multiple tabs doing this work for us rather than just have one isolated project going on. So just a little bit of nugget of information there. If it helps, great. If it doesn't, then no problem at all. But I think, moving away from staring at what it's doing here and going off and doing something is really where the value lies. With that being said, you can see it's outputted the spreadsheet for us after a few minutes, and it's just inspecting the styling and making sure everything looks good before it gives us the final output. So let's wait for that to finish. You can see now within the skills and plugins section, we have Word and Excel have both been used. You can just keep an eye on here to see what skills are actually being utilized. Maybe it's found an issue because it's rebuilding the spreadsheet and then it's going through another verification process. And you can see we now have the finished output. Now, by accident, I did stop the process, so I just asked it to please continue, and it did. Found the output, said it was ready, gave us the summary, assumptions, projection, and then just the high-level summary of what it's done. So let's take a look at what it's done. We open up the spreadsheet. A little bit nervous here. Okay, so it's given us something quite concrete. If we zoom out a little bit here, you can see we have a pretty much native Excel experience. Obviously, it would be ideal to open this in Excel to kind of see and edit this specifically. And if we go into the assumptions layer, you can see what it's kind of assumed using these numbers, saying what starter, growth, and pro should be. And if we go into the projection layer here as well, you can see the 36-month projection that it's done and the data that is inputted within here. So you can see it's utilized all of that context that we've built into the workspace and within this chat interface to give us that business case. Now, if we open up the slides to see what we have next, we're actually going to utilize some of the Work IQ features here. So we're going to be actually preparing for one of the meetings within our calendars, getting ready to face the decision makers. Now, I've put this prompt together saying I'm presenting at the Northwind Pulse Leadership Decision Review. Using the product brief, the market research, the business case, and the meeting invite, prepare me for the meeting. Flag anything to Beatrice from product, should weigh on. Now, I wanted to show you an example of kind of a static prompt because I don't think this is the best way to do this. I think if we're explicitly naming things within Work IQ, like the specific meeting within our calendar, the best thing to do is to just delete this reference that's just text, go on to add, and then go on to add work contacts, meetings. And if we type in the leadership review that I've added for my calendar for the purposes of this demo, and I click it here, you can see it will add a direct link to that. So it's not having to go off and try and find it and maybe get it wrong. We've actually added a direct link to something within our calendar. So this is a really powerful feature of Cowork that I recommend using rather than just having static text. You can see here is another example as well. We've just put Beatrice from product, but what we can do is delete her name in this case. We can add the attachments, add work contacts, and we can go to people and we can type in Beatrice's name, and you can see it's popping up here. And you can see we have a direct link to Beatrice over here rather than just a name. Again, it says a one-page briefing, but I'm just going to remove that because I don't want to constrain it to just one page. This is going to be really interesting because it's the first time that we're utilizing Work IQ, so I'm really curious to see the way that Cowork actually fulfills this. Now, what I'm going to do just for the sake of showing the model context switch is I'm going to use the Opus model since this is high stakes, and then we are going to send. So it's going to reason, it's finding the event, it's looking up the specific users, so it's using Work IQ, and it's giving us all of that profile information that it will then include within the brief. Now, because this is an example, it has even found that there's only 2 of us because I have just framed this as an example. It's reason that Beatrice from product is the key decision maker, which again, we have to take this with a grain of salt because the meeting is not a real example. And because we haven't defined a specific format, you can see it's going to deliver it in Markdown, which is fine for our case. Now, if I scroll down, you can see in Markdown, it's given me the briefing. And it's even reasoned that just because Beatrice is part of the meeting, it's not going to be a big conversation or a big decision. So you can see all of that metadata does definitely help and does steer the way that Cowork makes decisions. It's given us the 3 toughest questions and our answers, and then things for Beatrice to weigh in on. It's asking us if we want this to turn into a short leadership deck, or if we want a tight 1-page read to send Beatrice ahead of the 2nd, which is the date of our meeting, so she walks in already briefed. So let's say make the 1-page pre-read, send it to her, so we kind of have that layer done. So we've typed in our prompt, we're going to send that through for Cowork to finish that. So it's deciding if it should be a formatted Word document in this case, and it's decided that a Word document is the right outcome, which we believe it is. You can see it's now drafted us an email, giving us a widget to actually see who it's to, the subject. If we want to CC or BCC anyone, we can do it all within the interface. We have some send options here available. We can send it only to Beatrice in this case. And it also has a flag here sent by Copilot Cowork. If we want to maintain this, if we don't, we can just delete that. Now, we should probably take a look at the pre-read before we send it through, but let's just say in our case, we're very confident in it, and we're just going to send it only to Beatrice. So this is going to go through to her now. You can see the action has been approved, it's done, the person is briefed, in this case Beatrice, and now we are ready to move on to the final step, which is going to be our slide deck. Now, this is going to be probably the heaviest task, which is going to be to build this pitch deck end to end. So we're going to need to build a leadership pitch deck for Northwind Pulse that makes a case to approve the launch. We're going to draw on the product brief, the market research, the business case. We're going to structure it as the problem, the product, the value proposition, and we're going to say around 15 to 20 slides because we want this to be a little bit bigger. We want to keep it clean, we want to keep it confident, and now we're going to send this through and allow it to build that presentation for us. Now this is kind of working in the background. I want to show you an example of Cowork working while we're kind of doing other work. So what I'm going to do is build my first scheduled task. If I go into scheduled here in the top left-hand corner, I can see I can manage schedules or view the runs that scheduled tasks have made. In this case, we're going to create one. Now it's created a new chat saying that I want to set up the scheduled task. It's going to explain how it works, and then it's going to ask us a few questions to figure out what we actually want to build. Now, this is something I'm actually going to use, so I'm going to think up a use case, and then we're going to build this live. It's told us the scheduled task in Cowork. It's given us some examples that we can have here for a scheduled task. And in this case, we want an inbox or email digest, so a summary of new or high priority emails received since the last run. So this will be delivered to us. So we're going to click on this. We want this to run on a custom schedule. So we're going to describe another option, and we're going to say, please run this every 3 days. And also find any older emails that still require a message or a reply even. It's asking us for the delivery, so should it email to me? Should it be a Teams message, a saved document, or do we want to decide later? So an email is fine. We're going to submit, and now it's going to go ahead and create that scheduled task for us. Now, if I go back and check on the slide deck, you can see it's just writing the deck generator. It's using a confident midnight executive, which I'm not even sure I understand what that means. And this scheduled task is coming up in the background. You can see we've got a name for it, when it's going to repeat, how it's going to run. It says run in a new conversation or the same conversation. So I'm happy to just do it in the same conversation because I don't want a bunch of conversations adding here. It's given us a bit of a description that we can add to over here. And we can run this once now, and we can also schedule this. And we're going to click on schedule. So it's just setting this up for us. And it's now going to send us an email giving us the summary. It's gathering the recent emails. You can see this is running. It's listing our messages. And it's going to give us a full summary of what needs our attention, or my attention in this case. On the right-hand side of the schedule task as well, I just want to show you that you can view the schedule. You can pause this specific task, or you can run it immediately if you want it on demand. But you can see it's given me the email over here, and I can say always allow to send. So I just want to approve this permission so it can always run without my approval, because the value of a scheduled send is just going to be lost if I'm always here having to approve it. We can see it's now finished the slide deck. And if I open this up in the workspace, you can see it's delivered 19 slides. And if I go to next, you can see step by step everything that it has delivered for us. Now, Obviously, not everything in here is going to be right. I'm going to need to iterate. And I always think now, in the state that Cowork and AI is, it's always good to just download a copy or open the location within OneDrive so it can make direct edits to it and iterate on this so that AI can understand kind of the direction that you want to go in and what it did right and what it did wrong, so you can kind of iterate in the same session. So I always recommend having that kind of layer of going in there and doing some things yourself just to polish it up. But obviously, it's given us a very nice base of what we need. Now, I'm sure taking a look at this would probably take at least a few hours to put together in PowerPoint. Now, my PowerPoint skills are probably admittedly so not the best. But, just taking a look at this, making it look as good as it does, in my opinion, I think it's done a pretty good job here. So now that we've seen Cowork work with an end-to-end process and actually providing documents and finishing a process that we've set it out to do, how do we make Cowork more powerful? Well, plugins and connectors are really the highlight of extending AI and extending it to work within our processes. And this really does take a huge step into making Cowork more powerful for your business. The first lesson we're going to cover is understanding the difference between connectors, plugins, and skills, and knowing when to use which, because it can get quite confusing into, what's what, and what do I find valuable, and what would be most useful for my use case. So here's the mental model that I want you to put together. We've got connectors, we've got skills, and we've got plugins, right? Connectors is reach. So this is the bridge that lets Cowork pull data from another system and sometimes write back, usually through an MCP or Model Context Protocol if you're familiar. If not, don't worry about it. But a connector is a way to connect Cowork to another system. Then we have a skill, and a skill influences behavior. And what behavior within Cowork does is it allows Cowork to have a repeatable way to do something. So if you teach it a process, a set amount of steps, a method, anything like that you wanted to do it in the same way with different references and context points, skills are the best way to do that, and you can build skills directly within Cowork. Then we've got plugins, which is a bundle of the two. A plugin is basically a connector and a skill together, a package that bundles connectors and skills to do a specific job. So a nice formula I like to think of is a connector plus skill equals a plugin. And we're going to see some examples of all of these. Now, plugins in particular have three different types. So we have native ones built by Microsoft. We have partner ones, which are released on the M365 App Store and approved by Microsoft. And we have custom ones, which are built by your organization. Now, you don't need to kind of memorize this table or anything like that, but it's just important to know that all plugins aren't just built by Microsoft. There are ones that you can download from the App Store, and you can bring your own plugins as well. Now, I want to do a specific lesson on skills because we've gone over kind of the difference between connectors, plugins, and skills and kind of what they are and the differences again. But I think skills in particular are quite important because skills is how you teach Cowork how you work, right? If you have a specific method, if you have a specific process, skills are the way to instill into Cowork how to utilize best your day-to-day operations and get it more aligned to the way you work. So skills have the following qualities. They're reusable, right? So you define it once and you can reuse it consistently. It shapes behavior. So these are like processes, steps, the formatting. We need the skills to ensure that Cowork's behavior is shaped based off of them. And it loads on demand, so it gives the Cowork capability. So a skill isn't something that you need to use. It's something that Cowork understands when to use, which is why building a skill and the anatomy of a skill is very important because we need to define how that skill is triggered, when Cowork should call it, and when it should not. The anatomy of a skill. So the way skills are is they're effectively markdown files, right? You have folders and you can nest different capabilities within a particular skill. It's markdown, so you give each one a name, you give it a description, you give it a step-by-step, you can see here below, like a trigger point, give it some guidelines. But I really want you to focus on these three, right? So each one has a name and a description, and then it has the body of the steps that the agent should follow when it runs this skill and any sort of constraints within it. You really want to reach for a skill, again, if it's a repeatable process and you want it to be reusable and consistent. If it's something that's a one-off and you're probably not going to do it again, then investing in maintaining and building a skill probably isn't the best thing that you can do with your time. But if it's something that's repeatable and you find yourself doing it on a consistent basis, then skills can be a really good way to make that process more unified within the Cowork experience. So what we're going to do now is build a skill and see it in action within Cowork. So we are now within Cowork, and what we're going to do is go into the customize area, and we've just discussed plugins, so we're not going to go into this, but you can see the native plugins that are built in from areas like Dynamics and Canva. But what we're going to focus on is skills. And now, as we spoke about a little while ago, there are built-in skills which are included within Cowork, and if I click on these, there's not much to them, just simple descriptions. I'm sure eventually we'll be able to still see exactly the way the skill is formatted. But for now, what we're going to do is we're going to click on this drop down and we're going to select create skill. You can also upload a skill if you're bringing skills from other AI agents like Claude or like GitHub Copilot. But in this case, we are going to create the skill new. You can see it's going to instill a prompt automatically, and it's going to help us build a skill.md file and save it to my OneDrive skill folder. It's using skill management to help us build the personal skill. It's giving us a prompt to understand what we want the skill to do, and it's going to guide us through this process so it can best create the skill for us. So we have a rather long prompt of what we want, but just very simply, it's going to be something called the Pulse competitor teardown. It should take a competitor name and always produce the same structure. And then step by step, we have the structure in place. So the competitor's main strengths, weaknesses, where Pulse would win, their pricing, etc. Right? So this is the skill that we want to build. And if we press enter, what it's going to do now is it might ask us further questions, or it will just go off and build the skill based on what it has. If our prompt wasn't so detailed, you can see Cowork kind of reasoning through that, right? It says, I have everything I need. We have a concrete task, we have a trigger, we have a fixed 5-section output. So it has everything it needs, but if it doesn't, it will just constantly ask you questions so it can better refine your skill. It's now creating us our skill folder, and this is going to be stored in OneDrive, as all Microsoft skills pretty much are. What I really like about Cowork is it actually gives us a grade for the skill. So you can see we have 93 out of 100 for this one. I'm not sure where the 7 went, but it would be nice if it was 100. And you can see here it's providing the markdown file and also the quality report over here. So we just open up the quality report. You can see it's built us a HTML file where it says the risk is medium, the grounding is pass, the skill is ready to share. It kind of breaks down the different areas that make the skill dependable, and then what to do next. We have technical details as well through the HTML, which I think is quite interesting that it does this. I haven't seen this in any other AI agent, so if you're interested in looking at these HTML files, they are available for you. And if I close the preview, what the more important and telling area is this markdown file. So you can see very similar structure. We have a name, we'll have a description as well. We have an overview, when to use, which is where the trigger point is. So if we're discussing this within the chat, it will decide to trigger this skill automatically, what it should do, the core instructions, and also the output that we require. If you're not happy with this, I highly recommend iterating it with Cowork to make sure it is effective and it works the way that you want it to. But for now, I want to show you this skill working in action. So if we take another look at the markdown file, we can see that the trigger points and when it should use this skill is when the user names a specific competitor and wants it analyzed against Pulse. We're preparing for a sales call or deal or positioning discussion, or we want a comparison across rivals. So we're going to trigger this now. I'm just going to create a new chat so you can see we don't have to be in the same chat to trigger that skill. And then we have our first prompt where it's run a Pulse competitor teardown on Calendly. And if we enter this in, you should see it run the skill now. You can see the first thing it's reviewed is the custom skill. It's done the thought process, and it's now building the step-by-step to complete all of the requirements of the skill. So you can see how a skill can help you build that structure in place so then you can repeat it going forward. You can see the competitor teardown is coming together. It's given us all of the outputs that we want. And you can see that skill in this case has been successful. So everyone, that was the Copilot Cowork Masterclass. So I hope you enjoyed. And of course, if you did get value out of this, it'd be awesome if you hit a like and do subscribe, because I've been so consistent in getting content out there and trying to keep up with the technology that the Microsoft space is moving in. So if you're interested in keeping up with that stuff with me, then it'd be awesome to have you along for the ride. Of course, if you can share this with anyone around you who you think would find this valuable, that would be awesome. It also bumps up the algorithm so YouTube can show this to more people, and in turn, it will create more values. So if you could pass it forward to someone around you, that'd be amazing. Of course, I also do want to say, if you're interested in checking this out in Power Academy, we have a library of other courses that we're continuously adding to, continuously trying to keep up to date as well. And it's a platform that we are going to keep investing in to help your education journey in the Microsoft space. So with all that being said, thank you very much for sticking around, and yeah, take it easy.